A soft golden afternoon light filters through the tall arched windows of a former university hall in Regensburg, Germany. In May 1945, 62-year-old Dr. Friedrich Weber, a retired professor of musicology, sits on the edge of a canvas cot, holding a tarnished silver tuning fork in a velvet pouch. Outside, hundreds of displaced civilians move quietly through the shelter as American occupation forces maintain order following the German surrender. Inside the hall, General George S. Patton walks slowly down the central aisle on a routine inspection tour, his polished cavalry boots clicking against the parquet floor, his VMI-class ring gleaming on his right hand. As Patton passes Weber's cot, the old professor catches sight of the heavy gold-class ring with its distinct coat of arms. Instead of shrinking back or calling out to the general by his military rank, Weber stands up slowly and speaks in quiet, refined English. "That is the crest of the Virginia Military Institute, is it not, General?" Weber asks, his voice gentle and cultured, a fine institution of classical tradition. Patton's staff aides immediately step forward to clear the path, assuming the civilian is interrupting the general's inspection. Patton raises his hand to stay his aides. He stops dead in his tracks, looking at the grey-haired professor with sudden interest. "Do you know classical heraldry, sir?" Patton asks, his voice surprisingly soft. Weber nods, gesturing to his tuning fork. "I know heraldry and I know Bach," Weber replies with a warm smile. What happened over the next 45 minutes would reveal a deep, intellectual side of George S. Patton that few American soldiers ever saw. And the answer was not what anyone in that refugee hall was prepared for. If you want more untold stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring these forgotten moments of courage and quiet leadership directly to you every single week. Let me back up a second, because to understand what happened when a German professor recognized George S. Patton's class ring in May 1945, you need to understand the complex emotional landscape of post-war Europe. The war in Europe had just ended, leaving Germany a shattered nation under Allied military occupation. General Patton had been appointed military governor of Bavaria, tasked with restoring basic infrastructure, managing millions of displaced persons, and overseeing demilitarization. Official policy mandated strict professional distance between military commanders and the defeated German population. Generals were expected to maintain an aura of stern, unyielding victory, avoiding informal conversations with former enemy citizens. In the eyes of most American soldiers, every German civilian was associated with the fallen regime. Every aide and guard in Patton's entourage was making the exact same mental calculation. They knew the strict protocols of military governance. They knew Patton's fierce public reputation as a hardline military commander. They expected Patton to give a brief nod and continue his formal inspection tour. But the cultural stakes in that quiet hall went far beyond post-war politics. The restoration of peace is a delicate arithmetic equation, written in shared human heritage, art, and intellectual respect. The cultural math was profound. A war destroys physical cities, but true peace requires rebuilding the shared cultural bridges that connect civilized society across national borders. Ignoring a shared love of history, music, and classical scholarship reduces victory to mere physical conquest. Every moment spent engaging in meaningful human dialogue helped mend the broken fabric of European civilization. The intellectual connection could not be ignored, and that was the quiet hall Dr. Friedrich Weber sat in. Picture the scene inside that university hall in Regensburg in May 1945. High-vaulted ceilings rise above rows of temporary cots housing civilian refugees from across Central Europe. The air smells of clean pine soap, old books, wool blankets, and faint pipe tobacco. Sunlight streams through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the calm air. Through it all, General George S. Patton sits on a simple wooden chair beside Dr. Friedrich Weber's cot, his heavy wool jacket unbuttoned, his face relaxed in deep conversation. Standing near the doorway, Lieutenant Carl Benson, a 24-year-old translator from Chicago, froze solid. He was not checking inspection forms. He was listening in utter amazement as Patton and the German professor debated the counterpoint structures of Johann Sebastian Bach versus Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Every guard along the wall performed the exact same calculation. They saw an army commander sitting with an enemy professor. They heard a general speaking fluently about classical music, ancient history, and university heraldry. Stay with me because what happened next in that hall is the part nobody was expecting. The accounts that survive from that Regensburg shelter detail are remarkably consistent in shape. They come from the aides and translators who stood by the doorway watching the encounter. They all remembered the exact weight of the quiet conversation that followed. General Patton did not talk about war, not the way a conqueror speaks to the vanquished, not the way an army commander discusses military occupation. He talked to Dr. Weber as one fellow scholar talks to another. Patton spent 45 minutes discussing European history, classical architecture, and the sacred beauty of Bach's organ fugues. He pulled a small leather notebook from his pocket and compared historical notes on Roman mint marks with the professor. When the conversation finally drew to a close, Patton stood up, extended his hand, and shook Dr. Weber's hand with genuine warmth and respect. "Keep playing your music, Professor," Patton said softly. "Europe will need Bach to heal." Patton turned, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the hall with his aides following in silent wonder. Benson later recalled that seeing Patton talk about Bach showed him that true greatness lies in the breadth of a man's mind. See, what most folks don't realize is that George S. Patton was a deeply read, highly educated man who possessed a profound love for classical literature, history, and fine arts. He recognized that Dr. Weber was not an enemy combatant, but a custodian of the timeless European cultural heritage that war had temporarily eclipsed. The math in Patton's mind was immediate and clear. Building a lasting peace required recognizing the noble cultural achievements of the human spirit, regardless of nationality. To Patton, true victory meant conquering tyranny while honoring the beauty of classical civilization. By sitting down to talk music, Patton demonstrated the true breadth of American leadership, victorious in war, yet deeply respectful of human culture in peace. He transformed himself in that brief fragment of a minute, from an intimidating general into a refined man of culture. Dr. Friedrich Weber was born and raised in Munich, earning his doctorate in musicology at Heidelberg University. His father was an organ builder who spent 40 years constructing pipe organs for cathedrals across Bavaria. Before the war, Dr. Weber published landmark studies on Baroque counterpoint, teaching hundreds of students at the conservatory. In his velvet pouch, he carried his silver tuning fork, the sole personal item he saved when his university library was damaged in an air raid. He had a clear plan for his remaining years: rebuild his private music library, resume teaching young musicians, and write a comprehensive treatise on Bach's sacred cantatas. He was not a man of politics. He was a scholar devoted to the belief that music was a universal language capable of uniting human hearts. Dr. Friedrich Weber survived the post-war years and returned to teaching musicology at the university until his retirement. He often spoke to his students of the afternoon he spent debating Bach with General Patton, keeping his tarnished silver tuning fork as a prized symbol of human connection across the divide of war. Looking back at that peaceful hall in Regensburg in May 1945, a thoughtful question presents itself. Was General Patton right to sit down for an informal cultural conversation with an enemy civilian, or should military governors maintain strict distance to uphold occupation authority? One view holds that maintaining strict separation is necessary to preserve the authority of occupation forces. The other view holds that engaging in shared cultural dialogue is essential to build mutual respect and foster long-term peace. What do you think? Was Patton's conversation an inspiring act of cultural diplomacy, or an unnecessary deviation from protocol? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold World War II stories every week.